Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cassio Trevisani, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager at BSI. I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Safe Working During the COVID-19 Pandemic. We have an exciting panel today covering various topics on how to safely return to work. But for now, I would like to go through some housekeeping rules for this webinar. For your convenience, this is a listen-only webinar, so all participants have been muted. This webinar is being recorded, but for your privacy, attendees and all participants will remain anonymous during the webinar. If you're having any trouble connecting audio or video, please use the chat feature to communicate with one of our organizers. For better experience, we recommend that you connect stable internet connection. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Since participants have been asked questions when they register, our panelists have already curated some of the questions and answers you will hear today. If you have any questions during the webinar, please send your questions via the chat feature. We would like to answer all the questions, but due to time constraints, it will be impossible to reach to every question. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our chair for the event, Sally Swinchwood. Sally is BSI's lead standard development manager for business improvement and occupational health and safety management. She is responsible for working with both national and international experts to develop documents that help organizations of all times to improve the way they operate and to better protect the people who work for them. Over to you, Sally.
Thanks, Cassio. Let me start today by echoing Cassio's welcome. Thanks all of you for joining us. I hope today's session will help you feel more confident in going back to work or continuing to work if you never shut down, which of course many people didn't. And of course some people will be starting new businesses, so hopefully that will be helpful to them as well. I'd like to start by introducing our panelists to you. If we can go to the next slide, please. First of all, let me introduce you to Dr. Wilson Wong from CIPD, who will be talking today about managing people. Wilson, do you want to say hello? You can wave.
Thanks, Sally. Sorry, I was muted. Welcome, everybody.
Next, we have Dr. Aditya Jain from Nottingham University Business School, who's our expert on psychological health and well-being at work, and will be providing some tips. Aditya, are you there? Can't see Aditya. Okay, and Deborah Harding, the Managing Director of the Market Research Society, will be helping today with answering some questions about small businesses. Deborah.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon to you.
And finally, let me introduce Anne Hayes, who's also from BSI, our Director of Sectors, who will be talking a little bit more about why BSI has produced this guidance and why it's important. Anne.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Sally.
So let's have a quick look at the agenda for today, please. As you can see, we're going to devote the bulk of the day to your questions. That's the most important thing, is that we answer your queries. You have access to our experts today, so please make the most of it. As Cassio mentioned, we're very unlikely to get through all the questions today, no matter how quickly I get the panelists to talk and how brief their answers are. So we will do our very best to answer them after the session in writing as far as we can. In due course. It may take a little bit of time to get all the answers together, but we'll do our best to answer all of your questions. Thank you. Let's move on, please. So I'm going to start by giving you a general introduction to the Safe Working Guidelines before our experts go on to give you more specific information. Let's have the next slide, please. Thank you. So this pandemic has affected all of us. We're still learning about COVID-19 as we try to go back to work and get a more normal life. But the information, the knowledge and the guidance is being changed all the time, and it's quite difficult to keep up to date. The knowledge is also quite scattered, it's sometimes contradictory, and as new findings come out, you can find that you're doing things that you thought were right and now they're being told they're not right, do something different. So what we decided to do at BSI with the input from all of our many experts is try and create a single generic comprehensive piece of guidance which was suitable for any business with basic roadmap of how you can operate safely in your workplace, regardless of your setting, regardless of your size, regardless of your activities. So it's developed to reflect good practice from all sorts of trusted sources. We've looked at the World Health Organization, we've looked at various government guidances, scientific research, medical community views, and we've taken industry feedback and the input from our experts to come up with something we believe is very robust and basically applicable by anybody. As I mentioned, everything's changing all the time, you're all aware of that, and a lot of your questions reflect that. So this isn't a normal standard. If you're aware of standards, which I'm sure most of you are, you'll know that they often take a long time to develop. We work on a consensus basis, and this can take years. This standard was first produced in, I believe, 15 days, which gives you an idea of how differently we're working on this, because it is a dynamic situation, and we know that people need help now, not in 3 years' time. So we are continuing to review the document and revise it and improve it and make it more comprehensive. We published the second version at the start of July, and we aim to publish a third version in August. And we will continue with this cycle as there is a need to do it. If we feel it will benefit because the situation is changing or our knowledge is improving, we will revise the document again. It will continue to be available for download whenever we get a new version, and if you've downloaded the previous version, you have the option to have an automatic alert to know there's new content available to you. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So it is a very comprehensive document, and the list that you can see now does not cover everything, but it will give you some idea of how the document is structured. It's a straightforward plan. It's how do you think about your own particular risks in your own context, because whilst there are generic risks that are true for everybody in every situation, your particular setting, what you do, what your workforce is like, who you interact with will change what you need to do to work safely. And this document will help you navigate that and signpost things you should be thinking about, things that you should be considering. It then goes on to say, how do you put those plans into action? What are the tools you need? What else do you need to think about? Leadership is vitally important, so we have a section on that, along with consultation of workers. I think you'll hear more today, particularly from Wilson and Aditya, on just how important it is to bring your workers with you. If you want your safe working controls to really be effective, to really protect people, everybody needs to agree to them. They need to understand them. They need to know why they're being expected to do something or not do something else. So there's a whole section on participation, consultation, involving people in the decisions that you make as you evolve your safe working practices. One of the things that we've expanded in version 2 of this document is a new section on working at home. For the foreseeable future, more people will continue to work at home than previously was normal. For some people, this may end up being a very long-term or even permanent way of working. And the organisation, any employer, still has a duty of care to these workers, and we do need to manage the risks to people who are at home just as much as we need to manage the risks to people who are in a physical workplace or people who have to go from place to place to place. Some jobs involve going into other people's homes. Some jobs involve going into other organisations' workplaces, or working out on the street or in a field. There are many, many workplaces, and this document tries to cover at least some aspects of all of them, so that they will be pointing you in the right direction to think about specific risks for specific people doing different jobs in different places. Also in this document is a section on working with the public. It's not enough just to protect your workforce. This is a societal issue. It's a community issue. If there are problems in the workforce with incidences of COVID-19, or if there are problems with the general public that you interact with, or visitors or deliveries, bringing COVID-19 into your workforce, it affects all of us. So in this guidance, we try and take into account all of these different people that what you are doing in your work will bring you into contact with, and how you can manage that to the best of your ability. We can't manage and eliminate all of the risks of COVID-19. There is no way of doing that. But what we can do is make it as safe as possible by setting in as many measures as possible and communicating them really, really well, and making sure we keep checking they're working and improving them as we go along. So another section in the document covers managing outbreaks at work and also getting people back to work. This disease is affecting everybody differently. Everybody has different needs and different experiences. Some people will have experienced bereavement. If those people are working for your organisation, you need to support them. You need to understand that they may be more anxious, they may need more family time, that kind of thing. Other people won't have been touched by it really at all, and they will just want clear guidance on what they can and can't do, when they should do it, why they should do it. So there's lots of different elements to consider with this. We've seen in the news in the last week or so a number of local outbreaks in factories and workplaces, agricultural workers. So we have included a section on how you manage illness in the workplace, how you deal with suspected or confirmed cases of COVID-19, and when it is important to notify your official bodies, the regulators, to try and stop any outbreaks at work passing into the community. We have to remember that every worker has a family. Every worker has to get to and from work if they're working in a physical workplace. And every time they interact with somebody, there is a level of risk. So managing outbreaks is incredibly important. And one of the things we do emphasise is building a culture of trust and openness and support. There has been some negative impacts of people being scared to say that they may have been exposed, being worried about the nature of their employment if they are in a situation where they feel they should self-isolate. So the guidance makes it very clear that as an organisation, it is in everybody's best interest, including yours as an employer, to do this openly, to do it supportively, to encourage people to do the right thing for the long-term benefit of everybody. One of the things that has been most politicised, perhaps, is the use of personal protective equipment and face masks and face coverings. And we have included a complete clause on this, which reflects the best evidence available at the time. There is increasing evidence that covering your face does save lives. It protects other people, and it also, to a degree, may protect you. So please take the time to read that. There is no mandate that every worker should wear a face mask. That will be up to you to decide what is right for your organisation. And of course, just like everybody else, you'll need to keep abreast of the latest developments and knowledge, but there is guidance on that and how it should be used. Finally, and one of the things that we will really be looking at more today is how you manage your people and how you manage psychological health and well-being, This is a unique situation. It's not like managing normal health and safety risks. It impacts every part of our lives, and it is very wide-reaching. So managing your people effectively is your best way forward. So with that in mind, I'd like to pass over to Wilson, who will talk more about people management. And then we will move on to looking in more depth at the psychological health and well-being. Thank you, Wilson.
Thank you, Sally. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, my slide, practical tips for managing people. So Sally has given you an overview of the structure and intent of the standard. What I'll do is I'll focus on the people elements of the guidance. Okay, the next slide, please. So let's start by saying that the physical, mental, and emotional health of your workforce is paramount in assessing the risks before you unlock. The pandemic was unusual in that the attack is on an organization's human capital. It's on its people, quite unlike, say, a terrorist attack where the focus is on disabling infrastructure or systems. So but the pandemic actually immobilized and dispersed many organizations' workforce. So what I'm going to do is just to synthesize some of the issues raised in the standard in three questions. Is it essential? Is it sufficiently safe? Is it mutually agreed? So first, is it essential? This is important for you to understand because before you do anything, you have to understand the context, the change context in which you're operating. Because of the pandemic, everything is a moving part. There are changes in logistics, supply chains, consumer behavior, demand patterns, which of course changes your business and your business model potentially. And there are also issues that you need to monitor, like the rate of transmission in your local area, whether or not movement is permitted between zones, whether the individuals in your workplace themselves may have individual circumstances that preclude them being able to move into the functions that they normally work in. Also, with the pandemic, you will find that if your business is still operating, that some workers are exceedingly busy and others are left with very little to do. So what do you do with that? And also, one of the things that the standard does consider is when you have workers having to interact with other organizations, what are the potential points of tension? For example, when they have to go through security checks at another organization. So is it essential? This is the chance for you to then properly reassess the context in which you are now operating, and then assess the risks in which you've chosen to act in. The second point is it sufficiently safe? So one of the things that organizations would probably be doing is to assemble a team to coordinate the responsibilities of looking out for safe working with a variety of lenses. So some looking at the health and safety part, some looking at the monitoring the environment and policy context, some responsible for internal communications, some responsible for procurement and resourcing. When you're establishing your operating procedures, make sure they're transparently applied. For example, if you require people to get back to work on site, applying the operational principles consistently is important, because what you don't want is to have people come back based on existing inequities of power. So just because you are more influential, you can choose not to come back or choose to come back. What you want is to have it completely consistent so that it doesn't undermine your relationship with your dispersed workforce. Wherever they're working, as Sally pointed out, you have a duty of care, whether they're working from home or they're returning to work sites. Ensure that adequate resources are provided for their adjustments. So if they're working from home, make sure that they understand and that you understand that that they are not working from home, but they are at home trying to work. And there's an important distinction there. Do a health and safety assessment for those working from home. And then that gives you the information as to who is not actually being able to function well in that environment, and then support them with alternatives. Also, when you're designing the protocols for safe return to work, ensure that you bring along your people and key stakeholders. Consult, listen, and find collective decisions on anything that impacts the health, safety, and well-being of your workforce. Clarify also how their feedback and their intelligence of what is going on the ground is going to be acted upon. Because what you don't want is to lose sight of the fact that the day-to-day interactions of your workforce on the ground provides you an opportunity to fine-tune and improve on the protocols that you put in place. As Sally said, there is a danger that this intelligence is lost if there is a fear of reprisal. So really, it's very important that there is a culture of trust and an understanding of the common purpose of the organization and the workers to work safely for all parties concerned. So now this comes back to things like the quality of your leadership and line management. For organizations who are already quite used to remote working, you'll find that the investment in your line worker capability will pay dividends at the point like this. But for organizations who have not actually moved into remote working or flexible working, you need to support the line managers in building their capability and confidence in remotely managing their staff. And this can be done through e-learning, consultations, peer group support, and that gives you a better chance of a successful transition. And the message to them really is, as managers, you don't judge how others seem to be coping by your ability to cope or not cope, right? And just remember, at all times, you owe your staff a duty of care. The third point is that mutually agreed. It's important to recognize that the individual worker is the best judge of their situation, and they may not be able or willing to return to the workplace because of any number of reasons. They could be shielding, they could have vulnerable family, they may have childcare problems because the schools are not functioning as they should. There may be other areas that you are not actually aware of. And this is actually a time, one, for your line managers to get to know your staff a little bit better, but that every change should be based on trust and is negotiated. You cannot demand that your workers come back to work if there's a workable, safer alternative. We did some surveys about workers coming back to work, and we found that 4 in 10 people are anxious about returning to the workplace. And so that clear dialogue between employers and employees is an essential part of this returning to worksite process, so that we can accommodate the needs, the individual needs of the workers. Back to you, Sally.
Thanks very much, Wilson. Wilson's given us a good overview. Please remember that you can send in questions if you've got any particular questions you'd like to ask on this. But now we're going to hand over to Aditya Jain to talk about the impact on psychological health and well-being. Aditya.
Great, thanks, Sally. Hi, everyone. I had some audio trouble before, so sorry you couldn't hear me earlier. So just to follow on from what Wilson and Sally have already said, I want to just focus a bit more on sort of some of the clauses within the document which talk about psychological health and well-being. And as we know, obviously, mental health is of paramount importance, particularly given the context we are in and the impact it has had. I mean, the lockdown and, of course, the stresses of being in completely in difficult situations. So if you can go on to the next slide, please. So I want to focus on 2 clauses in the document, particularly the one on clause 4, which is on planning and assessment of risk, and clause 6, which focuses on mental or psychological health and well-being itself. So when we look at the planning and assessment of risks, we have to remember that as Wilson already said, we have obviously an obligation to a duty of care towards workers. but that includes a duty of care towards their mental health and well-being as well. And the risks that workers sort of are exposed to often are called psychosocial risks. Now, what do we mean by psychosocial risks? Psychosocial risks basically refer to aspects of work organization, so how work is organized, how it is designed, and how it is managed. And specifically, it relates to issues such as work demands, the availability of organizational supports, rewards, interpersonal relationships in the workplace, and a range of other factors. Now, the document goes on and sort of talks about when planning and assessing risks, you need to look at the assessment of both external and internal risks. And these internal risks are about relate to how work is organized. And that includes changing demands, the changing pace of work, time pressure that people might be under, shift work, and how these potentially can have an impact on people. Also, we have to think about how working from home potentially has an impact on people. Different people doing different roles, different types of jobs, those with different needs in terms of caring responsibilities, childcare needs, their own personal health issues that they might have already been dealing with. All of these need to be taken into account when we're thinking about how we support individuals, but also look at how we support them when we look at the context of their returning to work. So identifying psychosocial risks is quite important and has to be managed within the framework of whatever an organization is doing, particularly given that we are dealing with a crisis. Now, how does an organization go about doing that? In clause 6, this document goes and explains in quite a level of detail what are the different factors which an organization should consider. So it includes things like how do you deal with uncertainty, how do you manage workload and work pace, so what is the right balance? And that would determine on different organizations in consultation with various stakeholders, so the workers themselves, managers, clients, to try and see what would be a reasonable way to deal with the amount of work that can be managed, in what time frames, and so on. Working hours are also quite important to consider. Given that we have had unpredictable hours, a lot of people report that they're working longer because working from home and working online has meant that you're meeting in meetings far more frequently than you were. There's little gap between meetings. So all of these things have to be kept in mind. Also, working from home has to a large extent led to people feeling isolated, which has led to increases in role conflict or lack of role clarity. And again, these are issues which have to be dealt with. But I think the fundamental and probably most important thing that has to be considered is support. When we are all in an office or working together, we sort of have a sense of support from our colleagues, our co-workers, but also support from supervisors. Now, a lot of people have reported, and there are loads of studies that are happening sort of which look at how people are affected. And the most commonly reported issue is the sense of isolation, or feeling isolated because you're working from distance, even though you might be communicating with people on a regular basis. So I think dealing with these issues requires that there is very clear communication. People feel that they can communicate, they can talk about the issues that they're dealing with, and also that there is a sense of trust and support which acknowledges the needs of different workers. So just sort of going back to what I think that the points Wilson made are quite important. Involving workers is even more important now. It's always been important, but having people involved in discussion, especially how it relates to them and their needs, is important. As people come into work, they need to be consulted whether they really need to, whether they are okay to, and that has to be acknowledged. So I think to summarize, there are a range of issues that are important, which have to be looked at, but they have to be looked at even more seriously given the context that we are in. Thanks, Sally. We'll move on to the next analyst.
Thanks ever so much, Aditya. Let's move on to Deborah, who's going to give you some insight into how this is affecting small businesses and what small businesses can do to manage safe working at this time. Thanks, Deborah.
So my name is Deborah Harding. I'm Managing Director of the Market Research Society, which is the professional body, trade association and regulator for market social opinion research. But we are a small organisation. I have just under 35 staff, and we are, in effect, we've had a dual challenge, which is that we as a business need to be able to get back in terms of using our premises, but also we're advising our membership about how they can also get back to doing face-to-face data collection. And our members work in a whole host of environments, in home, in street, in stores, and so on. So we've kind of really looked at the guidance from both perspectives. So as MRS as an employer, the UK is dominated by SME employers. There were just under 5.9 million small businesses in the UK at the beginning of 2019, and that accounts for about 60% of the employment and around half of the UK private sector turnover. So UK is dominated by SMEs, but that is a characteristic that is common throughout much of the world, where SMEs are the engine room for a lot of the growth which is happening within countries. And when you look at governments and the way that they are planning for economic recovery as a consequence of the pandemic, you can see that a lot of the focus is also on how the SMEs are going to help to get businesses back on their feet and to get the recession kick-started back to recovery. But the issue, of course, is that COVID-19 has devastated many small businesses. The impact of decreased revenue, lost sales, late payments, challenging cash flow is a really significant issue. And there are many businesses battling to survive. The problem, of course, for many is the pipeline and not being able to see enough of the recovery coming back quick enough to enable the businesses to survive to that period. And as a consequence, many of these small businesses need assistance to get themselves back on their feet. It's a case of when you're battling for business survival, the focus is all about your business. And then when you can then consider the fact that you've got all these extra requirements that you know that you've got to adhere to and you want to adhere to and you've got a duty of care to adhere to, it's a case of, well, how can I do that? What assistance can I get to help me to understand what my legal obligations are as an employer, and also to get the kind of resources that are they're cost efficient, they're resource light, whilst also enabling the businesses to do what they need to do and to do it properly. And the UK government's safe working requirements are excellent, and they've produced some really good guidance documents on lots of different environments. But there is also a degree of expectation about employers' ability to understand how to take health and safety risks as risk assessments properly, which, you know, for a lot of businesses is not necessarily something that you do every day. Some businesses will outsource health and safety depending on their size and the expertise, and others it will be done at certain points of the year, but then thereafter it's not the focus of their sort of daily concerns. And for many small businesses, the kind of access to the qualified people in the UK, the NEBOSH and IOSH qualified people that would undertake these kinds of things, they may not have them within the business. And next slide, please. And this really is where the BSI's guidance document is really, really helpful, because it helps managers and owners of businesses to understand their obligations and to able to reopen their offices and their premises without the need to invest in what is potentially very expensive specialist expertise. Not only is it expensive, but also is could actually be more difficult to access at this point, because everyone's trying to do the same thing. So to be able to get a head start and to understand what the requirements are, this guidance document is so helpful. Also, as Sally mentioned right at the beginning, the guidance looked at a multitude of different environments. So yes, there is an awful lot that's about office-based and premises-based, but it also looks at doing work externally, doing work in multiple environments. And that is really, really helpful from putting my other hat on as MD of the Market Research Society and advising our members about those kind of things. We've also used the BSI document to help to inform our own guidance for research in terms of thinking about some of the things that, if you're a researcher working out in a shopping centre, or if you're a researcher working in someone's home. We've also used the BSI document as a way to make sure that we've addressed things within our own regulatory guidance. And I think one of the really helpful things is, again, thinking about the fact that as a business owner, haven't got loads of time and not necessarily got the expertise, the guidance is set out in a very logical way, which makes it easily accessible for those that are not necessarily well versed in doing things like risk assessments. Now, going forward, although opening up premises clearly for some businesses will be essential, if all of your business is conducted in terms of with your customers at your premises, then clearly getting those premises open is essential. For other businesses, the premises may be front of house, but other activities could be done remotely, and only certain staff and certain roles would need to be fulfilled within the premise environment. But I think if I was looking forward into the future is very much about blended working, where a mixture of home and remote-based working with also location-based working complementing that. And if for those of you that have got immediate pressure, so for example, where you are, your premises is where you really need to be in order to be able to engage with your customers, the guidance is going to be so helpful for you to get ready and get open without fear. I, for one, I'm very fortunate. I have a facilities manager who is qualified within health and safety, but that didn't stop us from using this guidance as well, because we're all under quite a lot of pressure, and the earlier presentations talked about the fact that staff are very, very busy. There's a lot of sort of psychological and stress that's happened to staff as well, and so there's always things, you can always know more. And the guidance for me was also a helpful check to make sure that we had thought of things that we should be thinking about. And so I can't recommend it enough. As a small business, I'm just in the about to start to open up my offices for the staff to be able to return in a limited way. And without this guidance, we wouldn't have got to where we are now. And over to Sally.
Thanks very much.
Might be Anne.
Yes, we're going to bring in Anne now, please. Anne, if you could very briefly just give us some insight into why we publish these guidelines and why you think they're important.
Thanks, Sally, and thanks everybody who's spoken today. We can go straight on to the next slide, actually. I think everybody's done a great job, actually, for me on saying why these guidelines are so important and really what the challenge has been and what the challenge continues to be. One of the key points is that this is a global crisis. In my working life, we've had a number of economic crises, but we've never had something which, as Wilson described, has attacked the people or targeted people in the same way that this has. And as a result, we're now in a situation where governments, organizations all want that to bring people back into a work environment where they're able to get their businesses and organizations back up and running. But in order to do that, we need to be really sure that we're building on best practice and best knowledge that is around in order to make our people who work with us, our investors, our customers, our stakeholders all want and have faith in what we're doing and want to do business with us. As a result, what BSI does is we bring together collective wisdom in order to bring that learning together. And actually, that's our DNA. That's what we do all the time. However, usually where we're in the situation where people have that experience from their working life. And in this particular situation, everybody's at the same point. Everybody's learning as we go along. We might have some parts of the globe who are slightly further ahead than others, but actually, as the pandemic has gone through, it has been a real challenge for everybody to collect together that wisdom. So rather than wait until we got to the end of this process and we can all sit down and think, okay, well, what did we learn through that? What we decided to do was change the way we develop a standard and really look at how do we gather the information as we go along, how we get your feedback as you start to use that standard or these guidelines, and actually how we combine that into this process, which means we do have a living document that, as Sally said at the start, will change, but actually it brings together all the live examples and learning that is going on at any one time. It's applicable anywhere in the world, and all I would say is that actually your feedback is crucial to how we develop it. We're constantly reviewing it in line with government guidance or scientific guidance and any other information we can get. But actually, as people start to open up their premises or get their people back to work in whatever environment they are, what we need is that opinion and that feedback so that we can alter these guidelines as we go along. Ultimately, what we want to do is to put this out internationally and to develop it into an international standard for people to use. But actually right now, it's about gathering that information and learning as we go along. In order to make sure we have time, I'm not going to say anything else for now. I'm going to hand back to Sally, but we're keen to have the questions as we go on through this webinar. So I'll hand back to Sally.
Thanks, Anne. Please keep your camera on, and if other panelists can put their cameras on too, that would be really helpful. Time is galloping along, so I'm going to ask all of you to answer the questions very briefly, if you don't mind. I'm going to start with Wilson. The government advises for those people who are shielding to stop strict shielding at the end of this month. And one attendee has asked, should we enable employees who have been shielding to continue to work from home?
Okay, thanks, Shelley. In short, no. I think what you need to understand is, following the principles, is it essential? If that person can continue working safely at home, delivering the outcomes that the organization needs, then the pressure for you to return that person into the work site isn't there. And if there's and that would be the safer solution for all concerned. Plus, if the person is actually uncomfortable in going back to work, then no, the answer in short.
Thanks very much, Wilson. Deborah, could you give perhaps 3 quick tips for small businesses who are trying to get back to work now? Where would they start?
I think my first one would be to not only consult with your staff, but also to bring them into the solution. I think in terms of coming up with a safe working plan that works for a business, it shouldn't be sort of just about the leadership and sort of top down. It should be bottom up as well, because staff really they understand their operational deliveries, they understand where the pressures are, they understand each other, hopefully, and actually if you do it as a sort of team solution, you get the buy-in of the staff at the beginning, but also you don't have to sort of learn certain things about the way certain teams work already, because if you're getting them involved in the solution, that means that expertise is in the room. Also, I think that the point about actually talking with staff and understanding what their fears are, their concerns are, but also their personal circumstances are, do that in parallel with that kind of wider consultation, because actually knowing if there are things that you can't do, you need to kind of know that quite early on, because of course you could then create a marvelous plan that is completely impractical, because actually the key people that you need can't do what you want them to do. And also I think it's the other thing is not to panic. It feels like a big mountain, but actually it isn't. Break it down into pieces. Always break it down into pieces. If you do it by piece, then actually you'll find that you've done the job before you've even realized that you've finished it.
Thank you, Deborah. Anne, we're getting quite a few questions about auditing and certification. Could you give a little bit of guidance, please, on how you can audit safely, whether BSI is going to issue certificates for implementation of the guidance or produce any kind of checklist to help organisations?
So right now, we're not going to we're not doing auditing to this standard. We're not doing checklists. I think part of the reason for that is, or part of my reasoning behind that is that this is a moving feast, and what is right today might not be right in 8 weeks' time, and so we need to reflect that in this document. I think what people can do is actually Deborah's advice is spot on. Really, is break it down into chunks, and you could create your own list of things that you think are important, or checklists that you are there that you need to work through. You could work through the clauses in the standard that are there, and just make sure that you've considered each of those points and have an answer to those points. The problem with checklists, and I nearly said it there, is they become a checkbox. You know, you can go through and say, yeah, we've done it, yeah, we've done it. And actually we want people to think a little bit more deeply about it and really consider what the implications are, because as I said before, this is the first time anybody's really done this, and so we're all learning, and so it's going to be very easy to miss something that actually, by talking to your people and by ensuring that you have that proper consultation, you could pick up. So I think your best checklist is actually your communication and your engagement with the people that are working with you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Teacher, you've already touched on some of the wellbeing aspects, but give a little bit of advice on how best to support employees who are working from home, particularly if this becomes a really long-term situation.
Yeah, I think one of the things I like about the guidance is that it has a specific clause on working from homes, and I think it sort of captures a number of things which sort of people should do. And I think what really is important is that we need to make sure that we have good communication between people within an organization to make sure that there's an awareness or some understanding of domestic circumstances, particularly people who have needs around childcare and other responsibilities, which might make working from home a bit more difficult than it would be in an office setting. And also, I think it's important to make sure that, especially if this is over a longer period of time, that people have the equipment and sort of the access to information and systems that they might need to do their work. So to making sure as much as possible, allowing people to have access to that information. So for example, some organizations have already allowed people to just go into their offices in a safe manner and retrieve some sort of even things like desk chairs, because it's more ergonomic to have a desk chair, which you might not have at home because you're not working from home. So things like this, I think, is basically consultation with staff is very important, and even I think critically important in these circumstances, especially if it's going to go long term.
Thank you, Aditya. Wilson, a question that's come through in the chat is, how would you advise someone to handle a situation where an employee is asymptomatic, but the management doesn't want to announce it to the whole organisation?
Okay, well, I'm assuming that if it's asymptomatic, the person has been diagnosed, tested, and yes, no, the individual worker has the right to privacy, so that information shouldn't be public knowledge, and it should be handled sensitively. So you don't have to announce it to the rest of the organization, but it is important that you follow all the reporting guidelines in order to facilitate public health interventions. Was there something? Does that answer your question, or is there something, another angle to your question that I
think what we could do with a little bit more advice on, perhaps, Wilson, is if somebody may have been exposed, if a small team of people have been in contact with somebody who has been confirmed as having it, how do you handle that in terms of the negative feelings around COVID-19? What's the best way to support the workforce, their privacy, and the individuals?
Okay, I think the messaging is that really anyone can be exposed to the virus at any time. It could very well be just picking it up from getting onto the bus. It can be someone you bumped into in the supermarket. There is a no fault issue involved in contracting this virus. It is a tiny organism that is everywhere. You know? So if you have that kind of messaging, that it is not anyone's fault for getting infected. This is one way of managing the news that someone has contracted it. And you have to trust your workforce that they are mature enough to understand that they could be the next one. They may have contracted it from their, from their neighbor. It isn't a virus that discriminates just because you're a higher ranking officer within a business.
Thank you very much, Wilson. Deborah, another question that's come in through the chat. Many employers seem to have considered the pandemic responses so far to have been temporary measures. What's your view on the longevity of this, how to make things permanent if people need to make things permanent, and the duty of care in the long term?
Yeah, I think that without a vaccine, we have to assume that this is medium to long term. And because in effect, as Wilson has just said, this is a virus that basically anyone can get at any time in any set of circumstances. So in terms of planning, you need to be thinking into the longer term. Personally speaking, whilst we've retained our strategic goals as a business, our actual business plan is being completely reworked, because also things like some of the priorities that we had before and assumptions we had before about how things were going to be delivered basically have got to be completely reassessed and reappraised. And going forward, what I'm looking at from my own perspective is a plan that's 12 to 18 months, because I can't see that we're going to be that there's going to be a significant change beyond that period. I think the one thing you don't want to do is to do changes that catastrophically weaken your business, that actually you've only made that you didn't necessarily need to make. So I think there's also a balance here between those things that are needed to enable you to continue to function as a business, as opposed to those things that you would also want to change because actually you've got strategic objectives, you've got a business plan that you're working to. But the important thing is what you need to continue to have is growth and success and great staff delivering that. So it is important to take a balance. But if I had a crystal ball, which I don't, but I'm personally thinking and planning to 18 months.
Thanks very much, Deborah. Did you want to say something, Wilson?
Yes, just a little PS to the earlier thing, just to say that merely following the guidance doesn't make your workplace risk-free. It is a balance of priorities, a balance of risk in order to allow your business to continue functioning. So if somebody gets infected, there may be you may need to change some of your procedures in the building so that it is safer because of a particular interaction that you may not have anticipated. So that's learning, but that doesn't mean that we are living in a risk-free. That isn't life. We all take risks in order to survive and to live.
And
Thanks.
Sally, can I just say that I think that there have been numerous examples over the past few months where people have started to adapt and to do things in a different way. And we did that instantly. And the amazing thing about humans is that whilst we don't maybe always like change, we are able to change. And I think it's really building on that, but you need to make sure that your people feel confident about the change that they're making, and that you've thought about the issues they have. And just as a side issue, we've published a report on the new normal, which has insight from multiple different sectors, which is free to download off the website, and we'll make sure the link gets put in the chat, but which really gives a view and people's views of about 4 weeks ago of what they thought was going to happen next and how businesses would change and the sorts of things that people might want to consider. And it's just worth looking at that for some insight. Thanks.
Thank you. We're getting quite a few questions through on individual vulnerabilities. The government has defined what they consider to be extremely clinically vulnerable and clinically vulnerable people. Other research has shown that, for example, BAME people are disproportionately affected by this. One attendee is asking, what do you think about how you can do individual assessments and support people to speak up and express their own belief of their own vulnerability and how you can address this, and whether some kind of self-declaration for employees would be useful. Aditya, perhaps?
Yeah, okay. I can definitely start. I think the situation requires people, sort of organizations, to do some level of individual assessment. I think because different people have different needs, particularly sort of if you're working from home, you have sort of to take into account sort of the domestic circumstances, also personal health issues which might put you at greater risk. Now, it goes back, I think, to the issue of sort of needing to sort of being able to have an honest conversation with your line manager or your employer about your vulnerabilities, so that they can acknowledge what they might be, and sort of allow you to work as much as possible, whether it's from home or in a way which is manageable, both from the perspective of the organization making sure that it attains its objectives, and also the employee making sure that they work as safely as possible. And it goes back to dealing with issues such as stigma. People should not have to worry that if they are at risk, or if they might have contracted the virus, to be scared. There's nothing to hide here, I think. And I think the only being able to do this in an open, constructive manner is how organizations can deal with the best possible ways. So I think you can do individual assessments if it is. Oh, I'm sorry. So I'll let someone else come in.
We will try and answer some of these questions in writing as well, because we're very nearly out of time. I just want to throw one last one open to all of you, very, very briefly, in a few words. Face masks. They've become very political. There's a lot of dithering. They should be worn in workplaces. Should employers make them mandatory? Anne, what's your opinion? One word, yes or no?
Possibly. I think they're obviously very important. I think anybody who wants to wear them should be able to wear them, and that absolutely is the right thing to do. I think if you're in an office that has massive space around you, then maybe it's not quite so essential. I think it's somewhat inevitable it will happen, if I'm honest. And I think that's a challenge that's got to be faced, and that was more than one word, and I'm really sorry. Deborah.
That's fine. Let's finish now, because we are pretty much out of time. I think basically what Anne is saying is use your common sense, which is really what a lot of safe working is about. Use some common sense on this. Do what works. The ultimate ambition is to protect people. So do everything you can to protect them within your means. Okay, just very quickly before we end, I'm so sorry we run out of time. If we can go on to the next slide, please. Thank you, and the one after. This is just providing you with links. I think most people have already downloaded the guidance. Please do download it if you haven't. Have a look, and do put some comments in on the BSI Standards Development Portal. As mentioned, we will be issuing a new document in August. Somebody has asked when in August. That's a little bit of a moving date at the moment. It will depend on how many comments we have, how much things have changed, how much we need to revise the document, but perhaps we can aim for mid to end August. And we will let you know as soon as we can.
We'll update the website with dates.
Thank you very much, everybody, for being here today. I'm sorry we've had to finish it.